Today I would like to talk to you about a topic that needs some clarification. And what I mean by that is there are too many people today trying various things to make themselves happy. And yet the Bible talks differently about happiness in general. In fact, when we are being instructed on how God desires us to live, the Bible says that we've been called to be joyful. Now, joy and happiness, are they the same? Are they different? Do we make much ado about nothing? Or do we not pay attention to nuance when we're talking about these topics? Well, maybe that's better for a roundtable discussion. Quickly, I'll point out to you, though, that happiness is fleeting. It changes based on your circumstance. And what makes one person happy will not necessarily make another happy. For example, if we go to Six Flags and we stand in the long line to ride the best roller coaster at Six Flags Atlanta called Goliath, I am very happy. If my daughter is standing beside me in that same line, my daughter is not very happy. The circumstance is different for her than it is for me, even though the event itself is exactly the same. Happiness is variable. Joy remains regardless of your circumstance. Joy exists even when you're in the midst of difficulty or ease. And if that seems illogical or hard to process, that's okay. But I invite you to recognize that if that's hard for you to apply, then what we need to hear God say to us today matters all the more. Because we all are very guilty at some point or this point of falling victim to the world's expectation and explanation of what makes you joyful and or happy. So, for example, we live in a world today where most millennial Gen Z people cannot go very long without touching their telephone. Most. And in fact, Becky and I's generation is the one that never gets talked about. It's called Generation X. And fittingly, because we're called the forgotten generation, it's because when we were children, by estimation, we were often forgotten, meaning we had to raise ourselves. Because mom and dad were at work, we came home from school to an empty house, blah, blah, blah. No, not guilt-tripping anybody for growing up and doing the things that they did. But for some, even later than that, but some baby boomer generation might be like, oh, I got to check my phone, I got to check my phone, I got to check my phone. And it's always odd to me when I think about how that telephone and all of its designs was meant to untether us from the desk, untether us from constant communication, untether us from nonstop meetings and things like that. And yet now we're tethered to just looking at it. But instead of meetings and typing, anybody actually type a Word document ever on their telephone? I mean, maybe you can. They make Word applications for it, but what do you think the majority of telephones are used for today? Texting, which is it's like we've gone back to Morse code. Oh, okay, fine. And watching stupid videos. The majority of the internet usage today is watching stupid videos. And the majority of them coming from a website called TikTok. Anybody that doesn't know what TikTok is, like what rock do you live under, that's fine. But also you may be familiar with an app that predates TikTok called Musical.ly. Musical.ly was the original TikTok. In fact, the company TikTok purchased Musical.ly and then revamped the code and created their own thing. TikTok videos are called short-form content. Short-form content helps educate your brain to have a shorter attention span, which is real bad for men like me because I talk a lot for a long time. And so if somebody's attention span is getting shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter to the point that if it doesn't catch their interest within 15 seconds, they flip to the next one. It makes it a little harder to have an honest discourse or a serious debate on a topic because you might need a little time to warm yourself up to what we're going to discuss. But as I'm flipping through those things, and I don't do this, but I'm related to plenty of people who do, I at least understand that the process works in that people eventually find videos where someone is purporting to live the life of your dreams. Right? It was at least, maybe you're familiar with it, at some point, Instagram is another popular place where people are constantly taking pictures. And it was really popular for a young woman to be walking in some very fancy place like Milan or Paris or Barcelona or some very fancy place, and somebody took a picture behind her and her hand was out like she was holding someone's hand. And it was like, I'm living the life of my, look how fancy she's dressed, how beautiful the setting. She must be so happy. And here I am, maybe in the bathroom looking at this video. And my life isn't that happy because like I'm fantasizing about, I wish I was in Paris, I wish I was in Milan, and instead I'm stuck in Louisville, and I'm in the bathroom on my lunch break before I have to go back to the drudgery of life. I'm not happy. That's what happy is. And so, preacher, this whatever you're about to say has nothing to do with me. I don't use TikTok. Oh, you just use your eyeballs then. You see somebody driving a brand new car, and suddenly the one you have isn't good enough. You see somebody with a brand new phone that has artificial intelligence abilities, and you don't even touch the phone anymore, just talk to it, and it talks back, and my phone doesn't do that, and so you think, wow, my phone's no good. Or my house, look at my neighbor just added on this or that, or all sorts of things that make us think, oh, I don't have that, therefore I'm not happy. By the way, the key and sole purpose of advertising is to convince you that you're not whole unless you have the thing I'm selling, which is the danger of Christianity, to see it as though you are trying to advertise Jesus. And it got even more complicated for the world when, at least for the United States, when they legalized the ability. Do any of you remember when you never, ever in your life had seen a drug advertisement? Like you didn't see an advertisement for eczema pills or Zoloft, or it was not legal to advertise direct to consumer if you were a medicine company in the United States until fairly recently. And as soon as they legalized it, anybody remember the little, y'all probably don't, it's a little round, he has no body, it's just a body, just a little round guy, and he looks all sad, and he's got little stick legs, and they were selling Zoloft. And everywhere the little stick man walked, it was raining on him. And it's like, do you feel tired? Do you feel blah, blah, blah? Do you? And he's just, and you're like, man, I feel exactly like that. And he says, then talk to your doctor about, right? I'm selling you something to help. Now, that's not a slide on taking medication for issues like depression or other mental things. If you don't believe that, if you need my opinion about that, go to your podcasting app of choice and listen to Ashley and Mason talk about mental illness, because that was last week's topic. That's called an advertisement, by the way. Hi, you see how this works? You just sneak it in. Well, some people see Jesus as that pill. Oh, you're miserable? You need Jesus. Oh, you can't find happiness? You need Jesus. Well, see, now I'm getting mixed signals, because that's true, but Jesus isn't a pill. Jesus isn't medication. Jesus isn't ointment that if you just rub it in a certain spot 5 times in a row, all of your problems go away. In fact, I'm quite regularly willing to tell somebody if they're accepting faith for the very first time, I will tell them, your life may get more difficult in the days ahead, because now you're on the radar. Now you're in the business of working, of tearing down gates, of working for Jesus. Well, my Bible is filled with men who wrote words about joy, who died terrible ways. Paul talked about joy. He was most likely beheaded in Rome. Peter talked about joy. History says he was crucified upside down. John talked about joy, and he was exiled to an island to basically starve to death over time. Thomas shared his joy in Asia Minor. We know very little about what happened to him other than he was martyred, meaning his life was taken from him unwillingly. Stephen, the first martyr in the Bible, is happy to tell the truth, though it caused men to stone him to death. It's funny that joy would be found in situations like that. But I want to look with you, with the time we have remaining, at the first sentence written by that man John, who was exiled to the island of Patmos. And I want to see what he says about his experience and why sharing it is important. And we're actually going to use this man John to verify and see what this man John is actually talking about. In other words, we're going to look at how he's referencing what he's already done, so that we can understand more about what he means when he says something about how things are all for joy. It's just a short sentence. 1 John is the first of 3 letters that we have, and they get progressively shorter. 1 John, 2 John, and 3 John. We know that John was writing to new believers, and we know that John wrote to them and called them his children. Not that John had fathered a myriad of people, but that John saw them spiritually as his children, and he saw himself as their spiritual father. And if you dig around in that, you will begin to see why the Catholic Church uses the word father for a priest. This is where this starts to come from. Now, when you're turned to the book of 1 John, before you read a word, you need to understand its context. Because what we don't often teach in Christian settings is church history. Because for a lot of people, hey, that's boring. But church history, super simply put, is that Christianity as we know it almost did not succeed. From a reflective, analytic point of view, what we would call Orthodox Christianity, that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, that he is both God and man, that he was born of a Virgin Mary, all of the things that made their way simplified into what's known as the Apostles' Creed, that stuff almost didn't make it. Because there was a group much larger than the early church called the Gnostics. And the Gnostics taught, gnosis in Greek means to know, and the Gnostics taught that there was a secret knowledge. That stuff that these men, James and John and Peter and Paul, that's part of the truth, but there's a secret amount of stuff you got to know. And that secret stuff changes what you understand about what those other guys are saying. And Gnosticism as a movement was, if you study church history, this close to winning the majority of people's attention before Orthodoxy exploded and the Gnostics were kind of driven away. Gnosticism, though, is reflected in the teachings of Muhammad. When you read the Quran and what it says about Jesus, a lot of what the Quran says about Jesus and his crucifixion is Gnostic truth. The reason you need to know that is because that's why John writes what he writes in that first part of 1 John. See, John, in this one sentence, is making the case for why his testimony is trustworthy. Instead of this mystery, you can't really know, I know, and maybe if you hang around with me long enough, I'll tell you. Instead of that kind of secret knowledge, if you just give a little bit more money, you'll get to the next level and I can tell you the next cool thing. Instead of stuff like that, John is trying to present the truth that I was actually there. I witnessed this. And so look, in that context of, no, this is just what truth is. This isn't an opinion. This isn't the latest self-help book. This isn't the newest idea of how to get along correctly in life. No, this is just the truth. Look at how he puts that in his own words. He says, what was from the beginning, what we have heard, what we have seen with our eyes, what we have looked at and touched with our hands, according to the word of life. Now first, you might be smart enough, biblically scholars that you are, you might know, who's we? If John is John, shouldn't he say, what was from the beginning what I have heard, what I have seen with my eyes? Why does he say we? Because John recognizes that he is a part of the apostle club. We is me, Simon the Canaanite, Matthew, James, John. I was there, we were there, Thomas was there. And he talks about the life that was revealed through that Jesus, but he says this in verse 4. These things we write, these things being what they heard, what they saw, what they touched, what they heard. These things, he says, we write so that our joy may be complete. So something about what John is talking about is how he obtains complete joy. Well, I want complete joy too. I want joy. I don't know about the rest of you, and so if you don't agree with it, you don't want joy, And remember, joy isn't fleeting. Joy remains. It never goes anywhere. It might be harder to hang on to sometimes because I'm still made out of sinful flesh and I still struggle to remember what is true. But joy never goes anywhere. Joy isn't the latest fad on the internet. It isn't the latest picture. It isn't, oh, I look so good in this, so today I'm having a good day and a positive self-image. Joy is everlasting. And John says, sharing what I have seen, what I have heard, what I have touched, what I have witnessed, that is what makes my joy complete. Well, hold up. Then I want to know more about what you're talking about. Because if you're the kind who's like, I love being miserable. Like I just wake up and I hope I stub my toe on the bed before I get into the shower. And then I hope the hot water heater is broken when I get in there. And then after I shower with the cold water, and I realized at the time there was no soap. And so I just had to kind of stand there and be like, well, I hope this is enough. I was out of deodorant. I didn't have toothpaste. My car wouldn't start. I had to walk to work. I'm soaking wet in sweat. I think I stink. Today is excellent. If that's you, please listen closely. Also apologize to your neighbor if you smell like that person would smell. I want you to look with me specifically at what he says he's testifying to. First, here are the categories. He says what was from the beginning. Then he says what we heard, what we saw with our eyes, what we looked at, what we touched with our hands. Well, see, he talks about every one of these things in his gospel. So what he's saying is, everything that I've told you already, I'm testifying to now because this is what joy is. If you want the Cliff's Notes version, Jesus is joy. What was from the beginning, what's he talking about? Well, if you turn, you don't have to, but if you turn to John, not 1 John, but John, the Gospel according to John, chapter 1, verse 1, just like we've been at chapter 1, verse 1 of 1 John, chapter 1, verse 1 of the Gospel of John says, in the beginning. Do you happen to know somewhere else that those exact same words are used in the Bible? In the beginning. Right? So he is calling my attention and your attention all the way back to Genesis 1:1. In the beginning. Now the author of Genesis has no point other than to verify for you God created everything. Right, this idea that you go to science books and try to validate the Bible or validate the science book through Genesis, that's a fool's errand. Because the point of the author of Genesis wasn't to say, oh, this is how he did it, this is the number of minutes and seconds that it took, these are the ingredients that he used. The very first verse of the Bible, in the beginning, God created. That's it. The point is given to me at the very beginning. Well, look at John in John chapter 1, reflecting all the way back. In that beginning that you might be familiar with was the Word. So there in that beginning was the Word. What's the Word? Well, the Word was with God. Oh, well, who is he? Well, the Word was God. In the beginning, God created. In the beginning, the Word was with God. The Word was God. And now here, the very first thing he says in this letter, what was from the beginning. In other words, from step 1, John is saying, understand that this isn't new, this has always been true. Ecclesiastes chapter 1, vanity of vanity. Everything is vanity. There is nothing new under the sun. It's always been this way. The beginning is the beginning, and at the beginning was Jesus. So John 1, 1 John 1, Genesis 1, all trying to remind the reader, remind the soul in search of joy, this has always been the way. It was always Jesus. In the beginning was the Word, and again, by the way, John, I don't want to be unfair to the rest of the gospel authors or to the rest of the New Testament authors, but John was the most philosophical writer that we know. Because even at the beginning of 1 John, he's trying to do away with Gnosticism. At the beginning of the gospel, according to John, he's trying to tie in Greek Platonic philosophy and say, you guys are right, you're just a little wrong. Because Plato had said, there's something that has to be above all creation. And Plato called that thing logos, word. And so John says, in the beginning was the logos. And the logos was with God. The logos is God. Always, this has been the way it was. But then he goes on, he says, what we heard. What does Jesus' voice sound like? What does God's, the Father in heaven, the throne room of God, how does it resonate with the sound of God's voice? I have no clue. Like, for example, when Moses hears the burning bush speak, does he hear Moses? Does he hear Moses? What does God sound like? John knows exactly what Jesus sounds like. And though I don't know his voice, because of his grace, I know exactly what he said. And too many people today want to forget or adapt that part of this. See, John is saying the truth is, I heard this. We all heard this. Well, too many people want, well, the Bible doesn't really say that. Well, that's not actually what he meant. That's the most dangerous statement of all. Well, you know, that's not exactly what that means. Now, you may be onto something, and you may be able to reveal to me some really interesting academic truth about the use of Greek or the use of it, and I love that stuff. But a lot of times people say, well, you know, that's not actually what the Bible means, to tell you a lie. Which is why it matters that when John says what we heard, he is reflecting on, surely, what he wrote for us in John chapter 10, verse 27, the words of Jesus, who said, my sheep hear my voice, and I know them. So what am I listening to while I seek joy? This fleeting idea of happiness. Okay, I'll give you an example. I'm real pumped up about motorcycles right now, okay? Now, it's been about a year since I learned to ride one. Haven't died yet. Amazing. Okay, can't turn mine over, so that doesn't make me any less risky because, you know, some people just can't drive, period. 4 doors, no doors, 4 wheels, 2, it doesn't matter, some people. And the number of people staring at their telephone drives me nuts. But anyway, I like motorcycles. I like them. Gary likes motorcycles. Papa likes motorcycles. All of us know you get on that motorcycle for the first time, it's nice weather, it's clouds out there, so you're not going to get sunburned, and it's a slight breeze. So when you stop at a stoplight, you're not going to die. And you're out there, the wind in your hair, there's no bugs, so it's not in the state of Mississippi really, but you're just driving, baby. It's fun. You do that for 4 hours, it quit being fun. Because you get out to eat something and you're like, because you hadn't done that, you know, you hadn't ridden that long ever in your life, and you can't stand up straight, and you're like, and one of you riding by, hey man, you all right? I'm fine. You're hurting. This quit being fun. Look, the longest ride I have ever taken in my life so far is from Louisville to Starkville to Kosciuszko to Louisville. That little trip on Highway 14 from Kosciuszko to Louisville, I was begging Jesus to move Louisville closer to me because me and my backside in that seat were no longer friends. Okay, what once made me happy no longer was making me happy. Now it's making me miserable. That's not how joy works. Joy remains in the presence of misery. How do I hold on to that? Step 1, John says, remember that it's always been this way, what was from the beginning, and then follow my thinking. I heard what I already told you. And what did Jesus say? My sheep, the ones who are tied into all of this, they hear my voice. They're not listening to somebody else's voice. It's not the latest and greatest speaker. It's not who's going to get elected in November. It's not who runs this town. It's not my job. It's not whether my car is shining. No, it's just Jesus all the time. What he says is how I access joy. And Jesus said, you know you're in the mix if I'm what you're listening to. My sheep hear my voice. He goes further. He says what we have seen with our eyes. There's a lot of flack thrown at 2 of the 4 gospel authors. Mark and Luke, though you may not realize this or have ever thought about this, Mark and Luke were not there. What Luke is writing, what Mark is writing, they are not first eyewitness accounts. Mark is John Mark, a young man who was not in the mix. And Luke is a friend of Paul. He wasn't there. Now, Mark is the spiritual child, the spiritual son of Peter. He was there. And Luke is the best gigantic buddy and spiritual child of Paul. And Paul was considered an apostle, stricken blind by Jesus himself on the road to Damascus. But Luke is unique because he tells us from the very beginning of his gospel, I've made every effort, O great Theophilus. I love that name, Theophilus. Should have named me that. That would have been way cooler than Mason. Theophilus. My nickname would have been Theo, but that's great. That means people of God, Theophilus. I've made every effort, O great Theophilus, to collect everything that is known about this man, Jesus the Christ. Luke is a newspaper reporter, gathering all the information he possibly can from all of the eyewitnesses that were there. But John and Matthew sat at his feet. John was there the entire time. So some people be like, Thomas was called later, Judas was called. Okay, fair. But Jesus said to Peter, come and I will make you fishers of men. And 4 people answered that day. Peter, Andrew, James, and John. This guy was here the whole time. And so when he says what we have seen with our eyes, he means, I was right there. I saw him walk on water. I saw him break those fish apart until there was so much fish we couldn't eat anymore. I saw him turn that water into wine. I saw those people lower that dude through the roof, and I was sitting there thinking, I'm making this up by the way, holy cow, they just tore this house up. And he told that guy to get up and walk, and he did. I followed him when we went to the centurions. I did all of these. I was there. In fact, what makes John even more unique than the rest of them is he was standing there as he died. And all the other apostles had fled in fear. John was there. It is to John that Jesus says, Son, behold your mother. He entrusted John with the care of his mother. So when John says he saw it, he saw it. But he also knows that what he saw wasn't just a man, that he saw God. He records on it for us. In John chapter 14, as John is recording this last evening that Jesus spends with the disciples before his arrest, before his crucifixion, John is recording how Jesus spoke words of comfort. And as Jesus was comforting the disciples, and thereby comforting us, he says in John 14:7, you know him, God, and you have seen him. Well, who had the apostles seen? Jesus. And Jesus said, then you know. You know him because you've seen him. You have seen God because I'm him. I'm God, you saw me. Here I am. This is where you very famously will go on and say, I have to go, but I'm going to come back. And when I come back to receive you, it's to a place I prepared for you. But see, is it Jesus that we're looking at today? When we want joy, this everlasting, unchanging, I don't care if you fought with your husband or you fought with your wife, I don't care if you got fired or if you got a promotion, just this unchanging, I can handle. The literal truth of what Paul is trying to get to us in the Philippians when he says, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. The idea is that joy enables me to do anything, not that I can do anything. You understand the difference? Because I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength, it does not mean I can jump off a bridge and live. It does not mean I can flap my hands outside and fly. That is a way people mistranslate and misuse that. What Paul says is, I've been poor, I've been rich, I've been hungry, I've been full, and what I've learned in all of that is, I can do all of it through Christ. I know, Paul might be saying, what joy is. And so Jesus says, you've seen me, but are we looking at him? Are we looking at Jesus the way he's been revealed to us, or are we looking at Jesus the way we want him to be? We want Jesus to merit out vengeance on every one of our enemies, but we want him to give us a lot of grace when we blow it. I especially learned when I took a wife how if I failed to do something, well, I needed her to understand all of the various circumstances around why I didn't do the thing that she had asked me to do. Or why I continually tried to put off the thing. As I'm so tired, or I have this to do. Them video games won't play themselves, honey. Stuff like that. But if she didn't do what I had asked and or expected to do, well, I'm not so stupid as to be like, what exactly is your problem? I never did that, okay? But when there's just like tension in the air, because you're being a little grumpy, because she said dinner would be ready at 5, and I guess I'll just go to bed. Or, excuse me, what are you saying? What are you trying to say? You know, those kind of things. Say, I want grace. I don't want to give her any. That's one of the most interesting things I've learned in 45 point whatever years of life. I'm almost 46. One of the most interesting things is forgiveness is the one thing we want and the one thing we often refuse to give. I want to be forgiven, but I will not forgive you. But Jesus, that's not Jesus, though. And that's why all we've got is this addiction to fleeting happiness. And yet Jesus says, if you've seen me, you've seen it all. You've seen the beginning. You've seen everything you need. I have left nothing off of what you needed. You've seen it. You want to know what does God look like? Look at Jesus. Look at me. But is that the Jesus that he is, or the Jesus I want him to be? That, well, I'm not going to give you a movie review. I don't even think you can buy it anymore, which is a little strange. There's a movie called Dogma. I am not saying go watch it, by the way. It is a little tasteless in its treatment of religion. The only reason I'm bringing it up is because it very famously made popular in social settings. This priest in the movie is trying to revamp Catholicism. And so Catholicism very famously has images of the Christ as statues, but he says they're too offensive, they're too off-putting. So I've made a new one, and he has it wheeled out under a sheet, and he pulls the sheet off, and he says, I'm introducing Buddy Christ. And Buddy Christ is this cartoony-looking, exactly what you think of when I say long-haired hippie. It looks exactly like that, and he's going like that, and like, hey, what's up? You know, we're friends, you know, wait. And that's how a lot of people want to see Jesus. Preacher, what exactly do you mean? I mean, people want to think that Jesus excuses their misbehavior. I just sin, and Jesus is cool with it. Well, then you're not looking at who he actually is. And John says, we saw him. And he himself said, you've seen God if you've seen me. Then he says what we have looked at. Now you might think, oh, look, see, what's the difference? Well, looked at implies recognition of a work done. So it's like when a little kid makes something that they're about to tell you is a goldfish, but it was made at school and it looks to you like a rotten piece of meat or something. You know, everybody who's a parent has had this experience. They'll draw and they're like, look, it's a horse. And you're like, yes, it is, but it's not, you know. That's how you know every parent has lied in their life at least that many times, because they're so proud, aren't they? And what do they say? They say, look at what I did. Look at what I did. Inspect my work. See what I accomplished. And we, with smiles on our face, oh, I see, that's great. So the idea when John says what we looked at, he's not saying what we saw with our eyes in the same way as he did before. He's saying, I witnessed the stuff. I looked at what he was doing. I saw what he accomplished. In that same passage, by the way, in John chapter 14, when he says, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father, he says, so believe that. But if you don't believe that, then he says in verse 11, believe the work that I have done. Can you do the stuff that I have done? They all would have said, nope. Then believe that, because it testifies to who I am. It tells you who I am. Okay, but what has Jesus done? We can list off probably a whole lot of miracles that the New Testament records for us. And that's really good, really powerful, and as Jesus says, it's a testimony of who he is. But we have made trite the truth that all of us are wicked and broken in light of God himself. And Jesus came to rectify all of that. Did he walk on water? Yes. Did he feed 5,000 people plus? Yes. Did he feed 4,000 Greeks plus? Yes. Did he heal a demon-possessed dude who was naked and scratched up and tied to rocks? Yes. Cast the demons into pigs, you know this? Okay, did he heal somebody who was throwing themselves in a fire? Yes. Did he heal a woman with a bleeding disease? Yes. Did he heal the lame? Did he heal the sick? Did he my favorite is, did he spit in the dirt and rub mud on some guy's face? Yes. He did all that stuff. But all of that was simply to testify who he was. What did Jesus come to do? Yes, he did those things. But what did he come to do? What did Jesus say was his primary purpose on earth? To do the work of my Father. And what what then was the work of his Father? To buy you back. You think so small and little of yourself if you forget that God himself gave Jesus to own you. You know, oh, I'm not a big deal. Oh, I'm not all this. Oh, I'm not, you know. You have to stop that. You matter so much that the creator of the universe said, my heaven needs to have you in it. And so I will open back the door that you closed. And the door opener is named Jesus. And the way he opened that door is an empty tomb that was filled first with the cross of crucifixion. Well, that doesn't make any sense. With the cross of sacrifice, not the cross of crucifixion. I mean, that's kind of what it is. Do you see why you matter? Probably not. I don't know why I matter. I don't understand God's purposes and plans. He says that I won't. My ways are not your ways. My thoughts are not your thoughts. That's fine. That's why crazy stuff seems to happen and you wonder, why would God let it? The disciples come across a blind man one day and Peter stops and says, hey, boss, is that guy blind? Been blind since birth. We all know him. That's Bob. Bob the blind man. Hey, been blind since the day he was born. But I'm just curious, did he sin in the womb and that's why God made him blind? Or did his dad sin and God punished Bob? Because they believe that's how it worked. And Jesus says, none of that. He was born that way for this moment. Be honest. We ain't ready for that. Be honest. I am not ready to comprehend that Jesus, God the Father, Jesus, however you want to, his plans are so lofty that maybe my limp has a purpose I don't understand. Except take the word maybe out. My scar has a purpose I don't comprehend. My mess up all those years ago, I don't know why that happened, but he uses that mess up. That's what he does. And John said, we looked at all this. We saw all this. Jesus himself said, if you have trouble believing that I'm him, then look at what I've done. And what did he do? He left a tomb empty. You and I cannot do what he did. So he did it on your behalf. Jesus is the new covenant that God mentions in Jeremiah. A covenant made with all people. And I live in the South, and I don't mean this offensively because I'm probably not talking about any of you in here. I may be just talking about myself. We hear that so often, it loses its power. Jesus suffered and died for you. Yeah, I know. Okay, yes, I'm glad you know, but like, do you know? You comprehend this, you accept this, you receive this, and therefore you live your life in light of this? Or just, I know. Joy comes from realizing the gravity of what it took to own me. Everybody's got a master. Jesus said so. One of two options. And Jesus says, and you can't serve both of them. You either belong to me or you belong to death. The last thing that John says is what we touched with our hands. What we touched with our hands. So my dad and I, strange conversations outside in the garage when I was young, and you remember, some of you might remember, my dad's the one who told me that God has a gold Nintendo, and he will play Super Mario with me when I get there, and you have infinite lives. Now, that message doesn't carry to some of you young people, because you don't understand that when I was a kid, you didn't get continues. So once you died with your lives, you had to start the whole game over. And there was some angry moments in my youth, and he would say, oh, in heaven, God's got a gold Nintendo. Now, I hope God's a little more advanced than the Nintendo Entertainment System of the 1980s at this point, you know, if he's up there gaming. But the idea was you get to be with him. You get to be in the physical space that God inhabits in heaven. You get to touch him. I get to embrace my Savior when I go there. But John says what we touched. What we touched. He's even wanting those of us in here who doubt to reach their hand. Even if you're not certain about joy or happy or none of this God stuff is for me, Jesus is sticking his hand out that you might take it. How do I know that Jesus loves doubters? Well, because it's the same John who writes for us the same gospel according to John, and he writes about a man named Thomas. Now, unfortunately, Thomas, we at least know, went on to do many great and amazing things in the name of Christianity, but what's he remembered for the most? He's remembered for doubting. What happens? Jesus is not in the tomb. John is faster than Peter and runs. And you think they argued about that? You think Peter was like, bro, you don't have to put that in there? I don't know. Maybe. Like Peter's slow, you know. But John gets there. He sees the empty tomb. Peter gets there. Mary wasn't lying. Look at this. What's happening? They run back. All these things happen. And Thomas gets told. And he says what? Unless I myself stick my fingers in the wounds, I don't believe you guys. Which, by the way, shows you there's a little dissension inside of those apostles' lives. Because why did he have any reason to doubt them? They were his brothers in discipleship. And he's like, no, that is too off the wall, fellas. I refuse. Now, don't get me wrong. We got fancy movies, CGI graphics. And again, you're carrying a computer in your pocket. You got a screen in your car at this point, some of you. The screen is bigger than my laptop screen when I was in college. Some of y'all got like 15-inch touch screens. Your car parks itself. You can start it from your bedroom because it's cold up there. I don't want to. You got heat. You got all this technology. So it maybe doesn't seem so miraculous to you. But let me just understand, if it happens still with all that technology around me, if it happens, some guy just appears right here in the middle of the room, I'm gone. Y'all going to have to remind me, holler at me and say, wait, it's Jesus, it's Jesus. I'm going to be halfway down the hall. I'm gone. There they are in the room. Thomas has made this big, unless I touch it myself, y'all are full of junk. Boop, there he is. In that moment, understand who's standing there. The fully glorified Son of God. And when I say fully glorified, I mean he's holding nothing back now. There's nothing incomplete. Yeah, sort of. Why? Because when he was pre-resurrection, he didn't walk through walls. He didn't appear in rooms. He hungered. He thirsted. But now, walking through walls, disguising his face somehow, because two guys on the road to Emmaus, they don't recognize him. And here, when Thomas makes it, boop, right in the middle of the room. John chapter 20, verses 27, 28. Jesus could have smited Judas for his doubt. Jesus could have said, you didn't believe? Out you go. But Jesus loves doubters. How do I know? Because Thomas has made this big, bad, bold statement. And if you'll pardon my paraphrasing, when Jesus shows up in the room, he says, here you go, Chief. Touch it. Do it. Thomas had been big. I'm going to stick my finger in his hand and in his side. I'm just be jabbing at him if you guys say he's that. And Jesus just says, okay. I like this story because it reminds me that Jesus has always been willing to do whatever it takes for me to come to him. For just a moment, it's almost like dying wasn't enough. Being resurrected wasn't enough. Thomas said, no, I got to touch him. And so Jesus said, okay. Now what does Thomas do? You know how when things happen and like time slows down? You ever done, like something happens and like it seems to happen real slow in your mind, but it probably happened in 3 seconds? I can only imagine what was racing through Thomas's mind, looking at Jesus standing in front of him going, you can touch it then. I mean, this man just appeared in the room. Did he hear what I said? Must have heard what I said because he's sticking his hand out at me. All these people are looking at me. They all know I'm a liar because I'm not about to do that because I am very uncomfortable right now. And somewhere in the midst of that, he is overcome with the realization, you are exactly who we have said you are. So it says he falls to his knees and says, my Lord. Doesn't touch him. In fact, there's never an account after that of Thomas touching him. So John says, understand something. It was always this way. We heard it. We saw it. We looked at what he did. We touched him. Reach here with your finger. And after he makes this pronouncement, he says at the end that he writes all these things that our joy may be full. All this time just to get to that one statement. Preacher, you just spent all that time in that one statement. Please tell me you're not going to listen to John 15:11. The words of Jesus. Remember, John is saying, I wrote these things so that your joy would be full, so that my joy would be full, so that our joy would be full. I wrote these things. Okay, you still with me? John said, I wrote them down. But if I look at John 15:11, Jesus says, these things I have said to you, that your joy would be full. You get it? You see, John is just writing the things that Jesus said because John says writing them makes my joy full because they're the things he said. And the things he said, I say these things so that you would have my joy in you and so your joy would be full. There's nothing left out. And the thing that bothers me the most is I live in a world and I succumb to myself that doesn't amaze me anymore. It doesn't amaze me that God says, I've given you absolutely everything you need. Every time you come across a situation, you say, you can't, I don't know, I'm unsure. Jesus says, I got you. I withhold nothing. Stick your hand in there. What do you need? Jesus says, I got you. Anything you ask for in my name, it will be yours. Oh, I'm going to ask for $1 million. Understand what he means. If you seek him, if you love him, if you desire him, he will give you all that you ask for. So John says, I write this because this is how our joy is made full, to testify of him. And he's only reflecting then on what Jesus says. I have said these things. I write these things because he said these things. And then later on, in 3 John, verse 4, there's only one chapter, John himself says, I have no greater joy than this, to hear of my children walking in truth. What is actual, real joy? Knowing where I belong. And I don't mean, I belong in a letter club, or I belong with a biker gang, or I don't mean that. Knowing where I belong in eternity. I'm going to finish. Promise. I just want to ask you to either reflect on your past or look at your now for just a minute. I want you to consider the number of times in your life you did something only because you thought it's what would make somebody else like you. Ladies, I don't know because I'm not one, but maybe you wore something or you put your hair a certain way because you thought it was going to make a guy like you. Or you had a certain backpack or wore certain clothes because you thought that would make the other girls at school that you wanted to be friends with like you. How many times in your life have you ever tried to purchase someone's affection by what you were willing to do? And if you've done that, how many times do you remember it not working? You did it, but she didn't pay attention to you anyway. Or you did those things, bought those things, and they still wouldn't be your friend. They still talked about you after class. How many times have you tried and failed? And would you please put that right up against Jesus saying, I'll do it. I'll do the thing. I'll save you so you can be. How can I receive that but forget to treasure it? How can I forget what I know was from the beginning? What I have seen with my eyes. What I have looked at. How do I forget this? Why do I let the world take this from me? What cannot be taken? They can't have my joy. No one can rob that from me. But I give it. When David looked at Goliath, he had every reason to be afraid, save one. And it was the reason he used to not be. There you stand, good man, with all of your finery and all of your stuff. But here I stand with God. Everything about your life, God doesn't necessarily want you to be happy. Maybe not. But I assure you, God wants you to live a life of joy. And that's not because I say so. It's not because it's my last name either. It is literally because Jesus said, I have said these things that my joy might be in you and that your joy would be full, or more literally translated, complete, not lacking. Do you have that kind of joy? And if you don't, do you want it? Because I can't give it to you. But he can. The kind of certainty that everything's going to be fine. Because Jesus already said so. The one from the beginning. I want your joy to be as full as mine. But that only comes from knowing the one who gave us the joy at all. Do you belong to him? Does your life belong to the Christ? You have to know. So I'm going to pray, and then I invite you to ponder that. Do I belong to him? And if I do I know the things he said? Do I celebrate the things he's done? And is my life that life that he said he came to give me? A life of joy. And if in my head I think, I don't know, no, maybe not. We can move from here. We can leave that behind. We can live in the joy that he's prepared. But to get anywhere, I got to know where I am first. Let's ask God to help us reflect honestly on that. Almighty Father, thank you for putting such rich truth connected from end to end, from cover to cover, in this holy collection of texts we call the Bible. Thank you for the man we know as John, and for his willingness to testify of what he experienced as your disciple, living, literally, Jesus, in your very shadow. And to remind us of these things that are and always have been true. They are the things that have been from the beginning. And that as he has testified of them, they are not things he has seen in a book or overheard others talking about. They are things he heard, he saw, he witnessed. Things he touched with his own hand. And in the midst of all of that, he shares with us the truth. That it is in knowing and sharing this truth that our joy is made full. Because it is in knowing and sharing that we know you. Lord, I know that many before me have made the statement that the most rich and powerful and profoundly ready field for harvest in the world is often in the church sanctuary. So I pray that you would get your sickle out today. That you would help us know exactly where our heart lies and which master we serve. That we would recognize that maybe we're fighting a battle about happiness, all the while possessing the joy everlasting and unspeakable. That you would either set our eyes correctly or change our sight completely. That we would know we belong to you. That we would look to nothing else for our understanding. That we would be enraptured with our Savior and hungry not only to talk about him, but to live according to his life and the life that we have been so richly blessed with. Lord, I pray you would deal with each and every one of our hearts in this room today, that we would know joy, unspeakable, full of glory, your joy, the joy that cannot be taken away, the joy that cannot be matched, the joy of Christ. May we ponder these things and know the truth as you reveal it to us, all for your name's sake. We pray together in your name.